This is Anarchast.
Hey kids, welcome to another edition of Anarchast, your home for anarchy on the internet. I have a second-time guest. We rarely have people on more than one time, but they're only allowed on if they're sort of special. And he is Brett Veinotte of School Sucks podcast. The last time we had him on was it was actually more than 2 years ago in 2012, so it's been a long time. And actually, one of the reasons I contacted him, although we've been in contact before anyway, was he had just done this, actually he had done it about a year ago, I believe, but I had just come across it, a great video. It's called Why Libertarianism is So Dangerous. And it's actually a 13-minute video, and we won't play the whole thing here, but I'm going to play 2 minutes of it just so you can get a sense for it, and we'll have the video down below afterwards. So we'll play a few minutes of this video so you can see what the general theme of the video is, and then we'll come back and we'll talk to Brett.
Hi, my name is Brett, and I'm currently recovering from a dangerous and extreme belief system. A belief system that if I had not taken action, most likely would have landed me in jail or even a mental institution. This belief system has many names, but it is most often referred to as libertarianism. For years, I would frighten ordinary people with long rants about the non-aggression principle. That's the central ethical stance in libertarianism, which asserts that the initiation of physical force against persons or property, or the threat of such force, is inherently illegitimate, regardless of what kind of excuses somebody makes up to aggress. I know, when I hear myself say it out loud today, I realize how crazy I once was. But I've made a lot of progress. Through my exposure to new points of view and sources of information, I've realized that I was being just too optimistic about the huge group of people who live their lives peacefully and mind their own business, and too cynical about the tiny group of people who disregard these utopian notions of non-aggression, property rights, and self-ownership in order to keep us safe and maintain stability. Even though a lot of the time it does seem like they have no problem treating our communities and the entire planet like their own personal f***ing whoa. I'm sorry. Still trying to let go of some of this negative imagery. Like I said, recovery is a process. But it wasn't just the flaws in libertarian thinking, it was also the dangers. This occurred to me one day when somebody who lives in the real world asked me the question, what would you do if you woke up tomorrow and government was gone? I had never thought about it before, and at that point a terrifying worst case scenario started to play out in my mind. And before I was even halfway through this imaginative what-if scenario, things got so dark that I was forced to swear off the philosophy of liberty for good.
So as you can see, it's very interesting, and one of the things I really liked about it is it totally takes a different take on libertarianism and really sort of puts everything on its head, and so it's a really great video, and he's been doing a lot of great work. Another great video that I saw just recently of Brett's is Before You Send Your Child to Public School, which I definitely agree with. And of course, Brett talks a lot about schooling and how, especially public schooling, and how bad it is. So Brett, great to see you again.
It's great to be with you, Jeff. Thanks for having me on for a second time.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. Let's talk about this first video first. It's really interesting, the why libertarianism is so dangerous. Tell people a little bit about the concept and where you got the idea and what it's about.
Sure. Well, the idea, it kind of came from two places. I heard this talk by Robert Higgs, and it might have been, 5-6 years ago, and he was talking about how he thought the state came to be. So we're talking like pre-Egyptian empire. I think the phrase he used is that some people recognized that they had this comparative advantage when it came to violence. And violence was very useful, or a tendency to be violent, or to not be completely put off and disturbed by the sight of blood of animals, also ultimately translated into people doing violence against other people, taking their stuff, taking over where they live, and eventually that became the state. Now, that's a theory, but I remember having the conversation with a family member who was very liberal, and expressing my views on anarchism. And he, you've probably had these conversations with people before where it immediately goes to the worst case scenario. So I just said, okay, let's go there. And I kind of walked him through, like, do you agree this would happen next? And then this would happen next. And he, I don't want to give him less credit than he deserves, but he took all the bait and ate it. And, we wound up in this worst case scenario, which is, I don't want to spoil it for people. I want people to go and watch the video. But the idea is, if all the worst things happened after the sudden dissolution of the government, which is not what most of us are in favor of, at least here in the United States. I mean, maybe if you're in Mexico, you're actually a little bit safer. But I imagine if we woke up tomorrow and government was gone, it would be pretty chaotic here in the U.S. for a while. So it talks about the most drastic implementation of our ideas and the worst case scenario. And what I suggested when I first talked about it in a podcast all the way back in 2010 is that Status might not mind the ending so much.
Yeah, I don't think... Yeah, go ahead.
I don't know how much more we can say about it than that, but yeah, I mean, the only other problem that I had with it, and one of the reasons why I was reluctant to make the video, I'm glad I did, because it got like 60,000 views, which is pretty good. It's kind of a stacking the deck logical fallacy. I'm kind of, pretending to have an argument and taking it exactly where I want it to go, which is, maybe a little unfair, but it's a fun video, and I hope that comes through.
Yeah, no, it totally does, and it's not unfair at all. I think it was a great way to flip it on its head a little bit. And I always, the reason that really resonated with me is because I've had these conversations with Status so many times, obviously. And it's funny because that was the same conclusion I came to. And I don't think we have to worry about giving out spoilers here. No one paid, I don't know what it costs in the US now, $20 to go to a movie, and you might get shot. So it's not like we have to worry about spoilers. It's a 13-minute video. But sure. Really what it's saying is that, for example, like for Status, they always go, well, without the government, we would, first of all, there'd be this period of, chaos, which is probably correct, especially in the US, as you pointed out, because so many people have been so ingrained into the system. And this is actually something I'm kind of working on too, on a sort of a side note, is trying to put a little bit of a plan together for people on how we can transition from the state to anarchy. That's something I'm kind of working on, because that is going to be a very interesting transition. But the funny part is that what they'll say is, well, eventually some people will get some control of certain things and they'll have some money, and they'll end up, and they keep going and going, and then they say, and by then those people with all this money will just make people do things, and even steal money from them. And basically what they're describing is the world we live in today. So the funniest part about the whole thing is the worst case scenario they can envision is that if we were to get rid of the state, that in 10 or 20 years we would be back to where we are again today after a really mostly nice 10 or 20 years for the most part. So the worst case scenario is we have governments again, and that's the best case that Status can make about anarchy, is that that's the worst case scenario, is that we would just be where we are now. So why not? We have nothing to lose and everything to gain by just moving towards getting rid of the state.
Sure, yeah, and I would say it wouldn't just be governments again, it would be pretty much our present day, especially in the U.S. Now, I know you're from Canada and you've spent some time in the U.S., but things are bad here, and I know you know that. Mm-hmm. And, I don't just say governments again, because governments again doesn't necessarily describe what's going on here now. I see, the United States government pretty much in its final phase before collapse. It's not sustainable anymore. And this thing is coming down. And yeah, maybe from, tracing our history back thousands of years, where people were hitting each other with rocks to get what they wanted. This was an evolutionary step in the right direction, but it's failed, and I think we're ready to move beyond it. And I think the way that we do that is, we talk about markets a lot, and I don't want to say we put a lot of faith in markets, but outsiders would describe us that way, that we have almost this dogma of free markets. And I think we need to recognize that right now there is a market for government. A lot of people, especially a lot of young people coming out of government schools and coming out of the universities, they think government is pretty damn cool. I'm sorry, legalizing pot in some of these states ain't going to help either, because now that might have been the one issue for a lot of people who were potentially liberty-minded or liberty activists even. And what I think we need to try and do is make what we believe in and, our efforts look cool. So we can't be all angry. We can't be shaming people. We can't be talking down to people. I think we all go through that phase, especially when, this stuff is new to us and we're angry and we feel like we've been deceived. Yeah, and it comes out in our conversations. And I know I pushed a lot of people away talking to them like that. And, the anger and the paranoia about the state itself also isn't healthy for us or for the message. So I do what I do because I'm successful and happy doing it. And I hope other people see that and they see the freedom. And, it's not complete liberty that I get from doing this, but it's a lot more than I would have had in any other educational career. So I want to show that off, really. I want people to know that I'm having a good time, and I'm trying the best I can to live the message in my show. Not perfectly, but so I think creating a market for liberty is very important, when, especially right now, we have to recognize that there's this enormous market demand for government because people are schooled to demand it.
Yeah, it's all been programmed, as you know. I'm sure you definitely know this because that's what you really specialize in, is a lot of the schooling and what is even the history of it, the history of the public education system in the U.S., as John Taylor Gatto has so well said, was really just a plan to indoctrinate people into the system, to create workers, to create people who obey and don't question authority. Things like that, and it's really a terrible system. But you brought up some great points on that we need to create a market for liberty, and actually that's a great book if anyone hasn't read it. The Market for Liberty is one of the books that really made me realize I was an anarchist and really got me excited about anarchism because it's so exciting. Mm-hmm. Everything about the free market, if there is a free market, is so exciting. And we're actually writing today a blog about how governments there's numerous places where, for example, one guy in Turkey, Istanbul, decided to paint a staircase, like it was a public staircase, it was quite a large staircase, a public staircase in just outdoors, and he painted it all with rainbow colors and really colorful stuff, and it was beautiful. It was really just like nice, and the state, the government, the city government, I believe, came in during the night and repainted it all gray, which, gray seems to be the color of collectivism, of communism, which is statism, which is government. All governments at their core are communist because they are centrally planned, at least in that sense. And they repainted it all gray, and there was a huge public backlash. And it came to the point where so many people were angry about it that the government decided to paint all the staircases, all these colorful things. And these are the things that can happen in the market, and it's really exciting. And we're starting to see that happen all over the world. People are kind of waking up to how things could be without government and all the terrible things that governments do. And just as one example, when you ask a regular person almost anywhere in the world, what are some of the worst things about your life, like just day-to-day life, what things really bother you? And almost always people bring up traffic jams and traffic and parking. All those things are run by the government. If they weren't run by the government, if they're privatized, it would be so much better. It wouldn't be perfect. There'd always be problems, but there'd be so many solutions and people would be trying out different things. It'd be so exciting and great and so many just new innovations coming in, whereas government really just tries to freeze everything in just this one state forever, and it's just horrible, and I can't believe that anyone even really buys into it. But people are waking up. We're starting to see a lot of people, for example, Eric Holder, the gun runner who's the district attorney or attorney general of the U.S., who is a total criminal, he was going to do a speech somewhere just a few weeks ago, and there was protests, and he decided to cancel. Same with Condoleezza Rice just last week. She was going to do a speech. There was so much protest, she couldn't go. Dick Cheney won't go back to Canada because he says it's too dangerous for him. George W. Bush, wanted to go to Switzerland a few years ago. He decided to cancel after they said they were going to arrest him for war crimes. So we're starting to see this waking up going on. And it's really exciting, and I don't know what you think about all that, but that's sort of the market for liberty starting to sprout. We're starting to see green shoots, real green shoots, not like Ben Bernanke green shoots, of just blossoming all over the world, just people sort of waking up and realizing there's other options.
Yeah, and because I focus on education, I see what the market is trying to say in that respect. So in the last 20 years, the market has sent this signal that people felt that there were major deficits in education. Really only two kinds of education were available. There was, secondary, all of the government school, which is about 15,000 hours, and then whatever higher education people do. And of course, self-education has always existed, but as we've seen the failures or even just the limitations of those systems, look at the embrace of information technology, the internet, even, do-it-yourself television in the last 20 years. People have said, we want to learn more. And sure, the internet certainly features some of the darkest corners of human civilization, no doubt about it. But there's a lot of Wikipedia is an amazing story, and that is the result of, obviously tremendous volunteer efforts, but also a widespread thirst for knowledge. So the indoctrination system definitely affects, almost everybody when it comes to political thought. But outside of political thought, it seems like people do still have this need for autonomy in their lives. They want to learn. They want to be independent. They don't want to have to depend on, it's so great. I remember, I'm old enough to remember, just taking my car to a mechanic and, he was like, whatever he said went. Now I go and I spend 15 minutes. How much does this part cost? What's the average labor rate for this job? And I take that to him and I'm able to negotiate. So the availability of information because of these systems the market demanded is helping us all out now. And it's also saying a lot about the antiquated education systems that most of us grew up with and people grew up with for generations.
Yeah, bringing up Wikipedia, I find that so fascinating because when I first heard about it, and I'm a guy who believes, you talked earlier about how we're known as believing that the market solves everything, and actually it pretty much does, but it's not perfect at all. But it's definitely much better than a centrally planned or centrally run organization. And when I first heard about Wikipedia, I said, there's no way that's going to work. There's a website where there's information on every single thing on Earth, and you can change anything. So you can go to any of these pages. It's like an encyclopedia for people who don't know, and I doubt many people don't know Wikipedia at this point, but right. It's like an encyclopedia. So you can go and just change anything you want. And I was like, well, that would be just chaos. You just have people going in and putting in misinformation all the time. But what happened was the entire market, and everyone was so excited about it because this is freedom, and they get passionate about it. And you actually have people sitting on just some obscure title, some obscure subject like the Amazon toad or something, and they will watch that page every day and make sure that no one changes it with information that isn't backed up by something that actually is factual in some way or shape or form. And you have these on every single page on Wikipedia almost, you have these people just making sure that it's perfect information. And they're not getting paid. Wikipedia doesn't make any money from it as far as I know. I think they run on donations. And it all works amazing. It's just fascinating. What can happen when you let the market just be free?
Yeah, I have this frequent outburst when working with students, and it's always related to Wikipedia, where I lose my cool a little bit because in the second decade of the 21st century, teachers are still communicating to kids in these schools that they should not trust the internet, namely Wikipedia. And yeah, you shouldn't, it's just, if someone just said as a blanket statement, trust the internet, yeah, that's bad advice. But why aren't teachers recognizing what a great opportunity the internet provides for information literacy? That you can go there and you can judge information. Wikipedia is it's like a gym for information literacy? How are the articles sourced? What's the depth of exploration into this subject? Wikipedia now will even tell you. It'll say this article needs to be cleaned up. If an article gets to a point where, like, it's a controversial topic, like, say, Obama, I guarantee if you go to Barack Obama's Wikipedia page, it's locked. Because the editors have determined that everything on the page is as accurate as information is able to provide right now, and they lock the page for editing, so people can't go in there and say he was born in Kenya, and make whatever unverified claims, probably things worse than that about Obama. So it's not the I don't want to call it the Wild West, because there's myths about the Wild West too, but you're right. I had the same kind of concerns, and those concerns are echoed pretty much by everyone I talk to about Wikipedia, because they're students. But yeah, there has a great interest in getting that information right. Volunteers have risen to that challenge, and they're doing it. And, I like to be able to have those conversations with students to say, Wikipedia is probably a better source of information than your teacher or your textbook, which I've said probably a dozen times. And you should be using it. And you should be, sharpening your information literacy skills, your intellectual self-defense. Because that's something we have to work on our whole life. It gets dull if we don't keep it sharp. If we don't practice intellectual self-defense and information literacy, we can get lazy. So that's a great way to keep it sharp.
Yeah, and you, of course, do the School Sucks podcast, and I've always said school sucks. I never liked it. And what we're seeing with the internet now is just, it's so much better. There's so much more information out there, and better information, real information. A lot of the stuff that they teach in public schools is just patently wrong, but it's just amazing, and a lot of people still haven't fully realized this yet. You don't need to go to these schools to learn things. It's actually a very outmoded way of learning. For example, I was always quite bad at math in school. I just didn't like it, and of course in schools they force you to learn things, and of course when you force someone to do something, they don't really do it very well, because they're not very happy about being forced to do something they don't want to do, and they're not interested in it at the time. But
sure.
Yeah, and I just wasn't really ready for to learn math at that time, and but now becoming an entrepreneur, I realized I needed to learn a few things about math. I couldn't even do basic percentage things in my head, and I found, of course, another free market solution, the Khan Academy, which is great. I don't know what your thoughts are on that, but you can talk about that if you'd like. But it's a great site, a very free market. I think it's all free. It's got, if you want to learn about math, it's unbelievable, and they do it in really exciting and fun ways, and kids just love it. And it just goes to show in the free market all the type of interesting things that would come about. There'd be all sorts of innovations and things like that, whereas in the schools as we see them today, especially in the US, and we could talk about Common Core, but they were already just brutal. They hadn't changed in the last 100 years. They're still sitting these kids down 8 hours a day in wooden chairs and telling them mostly propaganda and forcing them to learn things that they don't want to learn, and all they do is end up memorizing it and then forgetting it a year later. It's a complete waste of time, it's just funny how the free market just moves beyond that. And of course now it's even just getting worse in the US. It's really just becoming quite blatantly obvious that they're just trying to screw these kids up as much as possible with this Common Core. And I'm sure you must know about that. What are your thoughts on this Common Core?
Sure. First of all, just on Khan, I used Khan. I left teaching in 2006. Obviously, Khan didn't exist then. And I used it with students as recently as last year. There was a girl, homeschooler. She was 11, 12, 13 maybe. I think she was 13. And Khan was a great resource. Salman Khan drew some criticism for taking a bunch of money from Bill Gates and coining the phrase one world schoolhouse. And yeah, maybe that's something people should look into, but it doesn't mean it's not a great resource. And I got a lot out of it, and I really like the way it's set up. So I recommend it to homeschoolers or even unschoolers. On the other hand, Common Core, certainly nothing new. I think that this has been really a pretty consistent effort since the 1950s or 1960s to centralize control of education, which is really run, has been run for a long time on district levels. And since the establishing of the Department of Education, which I believe was in the 1950s, we've seen, steady increase in the centralization of control, which means that most of the money is still going to come from, property taxes. So money is delivered to the schools from a local level. The federal government does sprinkle some money down, and that's kind of like the strings attached. Like, we'll give you money if you do this thing. And we see that in all aspects of government, certainly beyond education. But those strings attached turned out to be chains in many cases. And a lot of states are realizing that. A lot of districts are realizing that. A lot of teachers are talking about how, it is the same thing they were talking about with No Child Left Behind. It's taking the joy out of their job. I mean, I remember when I was a young teacher, I loved it. I couldn't wait to get into a classroom. And I worked in private school, and the bureaucracy of that was sapping my enthusiasm after not too long. So the system really, I feel bad. Like, teachers are victims in this too. The system really wears them down. And there's lots of different aspects of Common Core that we can explore, but it is very much the next step of centralization of control over education and centralizing that control in the hands of the federal government. No Child Left Behind came before that, Goals 2000, Head Start. And there's some really great resources online. The one I always recommend is a video called Who Controls Our Children? This is probably 20 years old. But it talks about outcomes-based education, where what they're trying to do on the federal level and then deliver it down to the local level is remediation. They want certain outcomes that are favorable to the state, and they're going to remediate kids until they get those outcomes. So it is very much like another step in what school has been all along. I mean, it was about creating workers in the Industrial Revolution and creating soldiers. And now they're recognizing, obviously, the needs of society. Well, we shouldn't say the needs of society. The needs of the state have changed, and the needs of certain business people who influence the state have changed. And they're basically schooling kids to be happy as workers in not an industrial economy, but a service economy, which is why a lot of the curriculum is so dumbed down.
Yeah, I saw some of this Common Core. I couldn't believe it. First of all, it's amazing the propaganda they put into it, and they'll put it into like math now. Like, some people would say to me in the past, they would say, well, it's not all propaganda in public schools. They're just teaching math and science, even though the science is mostly wrong. Not all of it, but quite a bit of it. And it definitely hasn't changed in the last, few decades, because that's just what happens when you get these centrally planned things. They just rarely ever change. And there's been so much new information in areas of physics and things like that they just totally don't even pay attention to. But it's amazing. So now even with math, the question will be, if Barack Obama had 5 eggs and Michelle Obama had 3 eggs, Barack Obama is our savior, and what is the answer to the math equation? Like, it's almost that blatant. It's unbelievable. And then I actually
they're putting the government into the minds of kids more. I mean, the being a good citizen and in allegiance to the state is implicit in the whole school routine, because it's very much about obedience, lesson number 1, conformity, lesson number 2, and a subsequent lesson that follows is a kind of intellectual apathy. So that's always been there, and now I think they're trying to drive the state into the minds of kids even harder by doing, what you're saying. And some real examples are like in English, they're taking out a lot of the classic texts, like you can't read 1984. 1984 was fine when it was about the Soviet Union. But now when it really has a lot of echoes of the modern United States, that can't be there anymore. Animal Farm was a book that I think we read in school. I graduated in 1995 from high school, so that was relatively recent. And it's being replaced with like EPA manuals. That's what kids are reading in English. And, instructions for good citizenship. Yeah, it's getting very blatant. And, obviously a lot of people have pointed out that the indoctrination is much more explicit now. But I think that's why. And I think the biggest part of Common Core is it is asking less of students intellectually, because it's the same thing with cops. Like, a lot of police departments don't hire people with an IQ over a certain level, because they'll question what they'll do. They'll question what they do for a job, and they'll get bored if they're too smart. And, I think the same thing will happen while you're trying to staff a service economy. If people are, too educated, and I'm not thinking that school ever really delivered education. When I think of what education can be, I think my parents probably got a better public education than I did. But yeah, the service economy won't work if people are staffing it and they're too smart for it. So I think that's a big part of the drive, with not just Common Core, but even the initiatives that came before it.
Yeah, Vladimir Lenin said, if you give me your child for 4 years, the seed I plant will never be uprooted. And now in the U.S., it's 12 years of government indoctrination. And people are more and more seeing this as being what it is. And we're seeing all kinds of insane stuff going on in the schools. Kids will make a piece of pie into the shape of a gun, and then the cops will come in and put the little 12-year-old boy in handcuffs and walk him off. It's really just getting overt, and I consider it basically child abuse to send your kid to a government school today in the U.S.
Well, I understand that there's people who don't have the choice, and those could be, there could be economic factors for that. One of the things that I think a lot of people face that I overlooked on the show for a long time is most people who have kids in the United States are also divorced. I would say that's north of 50%. And if you have a spouse and you don't have an ex, I should say, you don't have the best relationship with them, they're not on board with these ideas, that's a very difficult situation. And I think it should be something that we work on, with my show, to come up with strategies to reach out to people like that. Because I think there's a lot of people who are dealing with that situation. I get a lot of mail, and I've talked to people, I've had people in my personal life who are in that situation. So I think there's a way to survive school if parents are involved and they keep their ear to the street, as far as like what's going on, what are you being taught, and some real education is going on in the home environment, then I think public school is something that could be survived. Obviously, it is super less than optimal. But it's also, that's another concern, is it's getting to be a dangerous place, not just because of how kids are treating each other, but because of how school personnel are treating the kids with zero tolerance, which I think now has been in place for just a little over one generation, right? So that's a whole generation that went through school with this threat looming over them. And that's enough time to create a professional culture and an administrative culture in the schools where people get very lazy when it comes to discipline, right? Because there is no negotiation anymore. There is no deliberation anymore. Here's the rules. You broke it. Here is the maximum punishment per zero tolerance. So we've had a whole generation of teachers and administrators that aren't thinking about these things, that aren't cutting kids slack, that aren't looking at, the broader context, like, why is Jimmy doing this? What's going on in Jimmy's personal life? That's not part of the equation in most cases anymore. And, I remember I kind of got pinched in a zero tolerance type thing when I was I think I was a junior or senior in high school. It was a drug-free school zone problem in New Hampshire. And I got in quite a bit of trouble, but I also remember being cut quite a bit of slack and not being the best behaved kid. But it doesn't seem like that's as common anymore. And I think the zero tolerance policies in these schools is a big part of the problem.
Yeah, if anything, it should be complete tolerance. Tolerance is a good thing, and it just goes to show that's the government, zero tolerance, no tolerance whatsoever. And it also goes to show just how sad and how horrible it is that what you're talking about is that, yes, it is possible to survive public school. Like that's basically your best case scenario. You'll get through it and you won't get too damaged by it. That's basically the best case scenario. What's your what do you think about things like unschooling and things like that? I'm a huge proponent. My son is 9 years old. He speaks fluent German, Spanish, and he's almost fluent in English now. I wasn't taught really any of it. I just had him. He was just curious, and that's what he was curious about, especially because I don't speak very good Spanish. I don't speak any German. So both my kids actually just really wanted to learn English. And I said, well, then they asked me, and this is how education should be. The kids should be saying, this is what I want to learn, and all kids want to learn. I've never met a 8-year-old kid who didn't have a million questions. And they said, we want to learn English. I said, well, one way you could do that is to watch a lot of these movies in English and just have these Spanish subtitles, or vice versa. Watch it in Spanish with English subtitles, and it'll just get into your brain. These little kids are like sponges when they want to learn. On the other hand, my son, just like me, really doesn't care about math. It's just not important to him. And so if I were to like sit him down and force him to learn math right now when he's not ready for it, it's really not going to help anybody. It's not going to help the situation at all. All he's going to do is just find ways to kind of cheat. That's what I did in school. I cheated through most things that I just didn't care about. I would come in with just, my entire arm was just full of all the answers, and I just wanted to get 50%. That was always my goal, by the way, just get 50% so I would pass. And I never wanted to get more than that. I would actually always aim for that just because I was so not happy with having to be forced to do this. But I knew my mom, for whatever reason, just really cared that I got my high school diploma, which I've never used in my entire life. It's not like I'm sitting here doing a business deal in China right now, and it's a multi-million-dollar deal, and the guy goes, well, we just need to see your high school diploma or some sort of college degree. Like, they don't care about that. That's totally insane. So what's your thoughts on unschooling?
I think unschooling is absolutely fantastic, and now I've been trying to use the phrase home education, and this was a lesson that I got from Laurette Lynn, the unplugged mom, who said we got to stop using this word school. Like only school can do school. So we're doing education, and that's something that I'm always trying to point out on my show. It's kind of this consistent theme. Stop. What I say to people is we got to get rid of the government school. How will the children be educated? School is not education. So I'm trying to be consistent with my language. I do still use unschooling and homeschooling all the time. I've probably done it in this conversation. The idea of home education, changing the language, I think is very important because it also suggests the freedom that's there. People think homeschooling, they picture like, okay, from 9 to 11, you're going to do this. We're just doing education. We're just doing learning. And learning is living. Unschooling is like how adults learn applied to kids, right? Like you choose to, you decide you want to learn something, and then you figure out what the resources are. Maybe you figure out who can help you with that, and then you learn it. So everything valuable that I know today, pretty much, with maybe some exceptions of some stuff I learned in college about history, was from unschooling. I am an adult unschooler. We all are. And I think we need to extend that same respect and freedom to children. So, yeah, I'm a huge fan of home education, unschooling. I think it's great. I think we have this strange biblical mindset that just kind of runs in the background that, we're born evil and dangerous, and then we need authority, some kind of higher authority, to make us good. And for a long time, that was God. But then, really in the 20th century around the world, it became the government, and the arm that deals with children is the schools. And, I think we need to get, and it's also kind of like a self-fulfilling prophecy. The schools treat children like children. We talked about zero tolerance. We talked about Common Core. Not a lot of respect going on. So the product of those places, in many ways, for a lot of people, is relatively predictable. You're not going to get independent, educated people out of that mold, because that's not what that mold is designed to produce. So it's hard to talk about home education or unschooling with a lot of detail or specificity, because it can be anything. It's like talking about dinner. You've got a lot of options. So I think that the thing that ruins learning is the force that's applied to it. And when that force is taken away, wonderful things can happen. I've worked in all kinds of educational environments, In recent years, the only tutoring that I've done outside of the SAT has been with homeschoolers or unschoolers. And it's made a huge difference. And it's made me feel much better about what I do. Because, as a tutor, for a long time, I was kind of like the enforcement arm of the schools. Like you need better grades. And I didn't want to do that anymore. So, I can't say enough about it. I mean, that's what education is to me. Learning is living, and we got to do that outside of these prison-like buildings that we're asked to spend 35 hours a week in between the ages of 6 and 18. That's insane.
It's completely insane. And Mark Twain, of course, said, "I never let schooling get in the way of my education." He was a fairly smart guy. I think most people would agree. I had Dana Martin on talking about unschooling. She's great. She has a bumper sticker that she says is her bestseller that says, "My unschooled child will be the boss of your college educated child." I think that's fairly true as well. It's a complete paradigm shift. And I think we're seeing this happening, not just in schooling, but we're seeing this happening, as I said earlier, all in every single area of life as people start to realize there's other options. And the government, up until the internet, really had control over information. And so people just didn't hear about these things. They didn't hear there was other ideas. And people have been doing things like this for a long time, but no one really knew about it. There's been people like the Mormons, or I don't know, like a lot of those sort of religious sects that have done different things that have worked in certain ways. And we would just never hear about it. We just didn't have that information. But now that we have the information, it's really exciting. And one thing I want to mention about Brett is he doesn't even have any kids. And he's just super into talking about education for children, and I think that's really says a lot about Brett, because a lot of people who would be really interested in this stuff, and I got really interested into it once I had kids, because I really started. I think the reason I got interested is because I saw all the bad things, and I knew there was a lot of bad things about public schooling, but I just didn't really know there was all this information out there about it. So Brett, why don't you tell people about the School Sucks podcast, anything else you want to let people know about, so that they can keep up to date on this sort of information?
Yeah, well, I mean, one of my interests is obviously a hedge, right? Because I'm going to be a doddering old man with a cane someday. And if the school keeps pumping out, this product, that's going to be very dangerous, with me and my old hips in this crazy, insane idiocracy world of the future. So I hope that doesn't happen. But I described what I do one time, and I've thought about this. I wouldn't describe it this way anymore, but as my penance, which is a religious word, for restitution. I spent 12 years in education in one capacity or another. I student taught in public schools. I worked in some very hands-on capacities in some very intense state-funded boarding schools. I talked about being an enforcement arm of the schools. As a tutor, I did No Child Left Behind tutoring. So I invested a lot of energy and a lot of my time working against education in my life. And during that, I learned a lot of things that I'm trying to apply to what I do today at the School Sucks Project. So we're a podcast primarily. We have a small community on Facebook and on our website. I have a YouTube channel. The username is School Sucks Podcast. And we don't talk much about school. We did in the first 100 episodes. Now we talk about education. I'm doing a series on agorism, which I'm hoping to get you on eventually. We do series on the trivium method of critical thinking. We did a series on defending yourself from BS called Logic Saves Lives. We did, what else have we done recently? We've done series on better communication, something that, I really hope a lot of libertarians will start to explore, strategies for communicating better with people. And, I'm always just looking for the next educational thing that I think will bring value to people, as long as I'm interested in doing it. That's really the only criteria, and turning it into entertaining podcasts and getting it out there.
That's great. And we'll have all the links to School Sucks down below. And I agree with you, Brett. I have some self-interest as well. I really don't want to live in that world that the government seems to be trying to push onto everyone in the next 10 or 20 years. So I do have some self-interest here as well. I'm trying to spread information so that hopefully the world can be a much more peaceful and prosperous place with a lot less violence, which would basically mean just getting rid of government one way or another. And I know it's going to be a process, but anything to do to move towards that, and things like what we just talked about in this podcast. If you have children, definitely look into this information. Definitely subscribe to Brett's podcast. Look up people like Dana Martin. We've had a few other people on Anarchast in the past talking about unschooling. Look into it. It's fascinating. It's amazing. I saw a massive change in my kids once I started doing those sort of things, and all for the positive. It's just been, in a matter of weeks, it really changed our entire family dynamic. Not just unschooling, but also the complete idea of peaceful parenting, which I've always done, but my wife is Mexican, so there's a little bit different culture here, and she was a little bit more aggressive with the kids. But once we started just using logic and rationality and calm and patience and treating them like individuals, which they are, it created an amazing family lifestyle here in my own personal life, and I'm sure it would with yours. So check it out. Subscribe to School Sucks. Definitely subscribe to Anarchast. Spread these videos. Please share them. If you're thinking about how you can help change the world for the better, if you believe what we think is for the better, and I think if you're watching this, you probably do agree, except we might have a few bozos down in the comments below, but be nice to them. They just don't know yet. They haven't heard these ideas. We just have, like Brett said, I think that's important too, is communication. If you see someone down in the comments below say you're crazy, taking your kids out of school, that's the worst thing you can do. Don't yell at them, just talk rationally with them, talk it through with them. That's the only way we can get these messages across, because the true message of anarchy is really one of non-initiation of violence. And when you come across as pushing your ideas or being almost violent with your words against people, that really goes against the entire theory, and they stop listening after that. So definitely check that out. And I'd like to thank Brett. And this has been Anarchast, your home for anarchy on the internet. Peace, love, and anarchy.
This is Anarchast.